let me start with something that because I think you are in a unique position among any broadcasters in that you've had a primetime Greta show on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and now VOA. Is there anybody else who's done that?
I don't think. Oh, Tucker Carlson, I think, has been on all three, but not a primetime show. I've had a primetime show on all three.
Okay. So you have the best experience of how dealing with those entities were. How do they stack up to you?
You know, if I were to do any of them all over again, I know this sounds really odd, but the best experience was actually Fox News. And I think that's in part, MSNBC was not a good experience. I mean, eventually they fired me within 5.5 months. So that's obviously not a good experience. But the difference is this, is that when I went to MSNBC, it's an institution, part of NBC, that had been around for 50 years. And so it was a little bit like trying to move an aircraft carrier, and it was very much set in its way. When I went to Fox News, even though I'd been there, I started about 4 or 5 years after Fox started, it was a startup. And it was just much easier to maneuver as a person who's a talent. So I just thought that I like startups better than something that's been around for a long time. CNN, I had a great time at CNN. I just don't remember. It's been so long. But that was, I was the accidental anchor. I went over there to do a little commentary in the William Kennedy Smith trial back before O.J. Simpson. Right. And I never left. I never intended to do this, but I just never left. So I was sort of the accidental anchor. This was not my career plan. So out of all of them, I think, and CNN was great. I had a great time, but it was not something I was planning to do for a long time.
There was something about a chair at CNN. I heard this chair story. What the heck?
No, this is very funny. Is that when at some point right after AOL came in, they moved me to primetime at 8 o'clock. I still had my Burden of Proof show in the middle of the day, and they moved me to 8 o'clock. And I had no set, nothing. I mean, not even. I just had a chair in front of the control room. That's all I had. That's the only thing I had. And they never built me a set. And I started in about January of 2001. In about June of 2001, the then manager of it, this guy named Sid Bedingfield, called me and said that the reason why I didn't have any set was because I was just a filler. I didn't know that I was just a filler of that show. And that they intended to do something else, but the show was doing so well that they decided to make it a real show, which I had no idea. So I thought, okay, that's cool, we'll make it a real show. So then shortly after that, he was pushed out and Walter Isaacson came in. Walter Isaacson came in from Time Magazine. And then about 3 months later, 9/11 hit. And it was pretty chaotic. But in about October, I went up to do my show, and it was really sort of an afterthought in the DC bureau. It wasn't Larry King, and there really wasn't much of an operation in DC. And I went up to do my show one night, and there was someone sitting in my chair just in front of the control room. There was no set, it was just a chair. And he was a guest on Headline News, which was a sister network to CNN. And I said, okay, that's it. I know I've been the stepchild in this organization for this nighttime show, but when the show starts, I've got to have someplace to be. I just have to be. I can't just, I've got to be someplace. So they quickly switched him out and put me in there. Well, then in December, I decided that they were beginning to fire like a lot of my good friends at CNN, because when you merge these companies, people get fired. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my good friends at CNN, it was awful for me. All my good friends were getting fired, and they were offering me more money at CNN, but I felt a little bit like a prostitute. Like, well, they were saying to other people, we can't afford to keep you. We're going to pay you more. And I thought, I just didn't want to do it. So on a whim, I called Roger Ailes at Fox News. I didn't even know who he was. Actually, I had called him before 9/11, and I was supposed to meet him on 9/11, and that got canceled for obvious reasons. I was on the runway when 9/11 hit, so I never got to New York. Wow. But so I went up to see Roger Ailes, and I thought, okay, this okay.
Did you call him yourself, or do you have your agent call, or how does this work?
I just did myself. I didn't have an agent. My husband and I have always done something. So anyway, and I notified CNN I was going to do that. I was never dirty in the business. I just said to CNN, look, my contract's up. I have this window. I'm going to do this because I never wanted to be dirty in the game of moving around to network to network. Right. So I went up and I thought, okay, Roger's good. So I called CNN and told him, and Walter Isaacson flew to DC from either Atlanta or New York, and to try to convince me to stay at CNN. And we were sitting there having coffee before my show, downtown at a hotel. And he said to me, I can't believe you're leaving me. I said, well, things have changed at CNN. I've had a wonderful time, but this is, I'm going to try something new. And I was going to Fox for less money.
Wow.
And he said to me, well, I can't believe you're doing this to me. He said, I've given you everything you ever asked for, at CNN. Okay, I went to Catholic school. Now I felt terribly guilty. He'd given me everything I asked for, and now I was leaving.
Guy had a point.
I had terrible. And then I realized, and I said to Walter, I said, Walter, what did I ever ask for? Because I never asked for anything. I said, never. I'd been there 6 months. He said, well, when you wanted that chair, I got it for you. And I said, Walter, when a show starts, a host has to have someplace to be in front of a camera. You just have to have someplace to be. And Walter said to me, can I take that off the table? And I said, yeah. So Walter was sweet about it. But it was so funny because I felt so guilty. He said, please stay. I've given you everything you ever asked for, but I never asked for anything.
Now, how did you view Fox? So look, I view you as kind of a political lefty, political righty. You're kind of a very scattershot, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
I don't say scattershot. I look at the facts, and it's just not always.
But
right,
they don't
right,
take you to
way,
one.
Right.
They don't take you to one camp or another. That's what I meant by you're kind of over there.
I'm not a political animal. I look at the facts. Maybe it's my legal background.
Fox was seen as that at that point. So how did you, when you went into that, now this was a number of years ago, so it wasn't as much, but how did you view that?
Well, here's when I was at CNN, we had no idea what was going on at Fox. Fox was not number one. We didn't care about Fox. In fact, in July of '96, when MSNBC launched, we all paid a lot of attention at CNN. Mm-hmm. 3 months later, in October, in '96, when Fox launched, none of us paid any attention. None whatsoever. So when I went over to Fox, this sounds horrible, I had never even seen anything on Fox.
Really?
We didn't even get ratings for Fox. We only got our own CNN ratings. So I didn't even know what Fox.
Weren't we beating you by that? I thought that Fox went ahead during the Bush Gore recount.
Fox, no. Fox went ahead, and I will say it had nothing to do with me. That Fox, the first month that Fox was ahead, was the month I joined Fox, January of 2002.
January of 2002. It's so funny. I still think of you as the new gal at Fox. It was like 15 years later. It's like, well, Greta just got. It's like, dude, she's been here for a decade.
The first night I was there, they said to me that I was doing my first 2 weeks of the show in New York. I was based in D.C. And they wanted me on the show with Bill O'Reilly. I'd never seen his show. This is February 4th, 2002. And I get on the show. And he asks me something, and I think he said something like, about Clinton being convicted of perjury. And Clinton was not convicted of perjury. I have to like Clinton, but he wasn't convicted of perjury. And I said that, and he goes, this is the no spin zone. And I thought, what in the world is that?
Yeah, we always used to, there were certain reporters who'd be like, we just can't put him or her on Bill because he would then be, he'd want them to, well, what do you think? Like, I know what I know. And he would put people in awkward positions. And if you weren't
Bill was
somewhat
always
aggressive.
A great colleague. Bill was always a good colleague with me, though. I mean, I always enjoyed him. But the thing is, Fox obviously took off and it crushed everybody else. But when I came over from CNN, and you have to also remember that the last 6 months when Fox is probably gaining traction against CNN, we were so absorbed with 9/11 and the aftermath, because you go 9/11 till January. I mean, we're consumed with, plus we had anthrax. I mean, we had everything going on. So the last thing we were doing really was paying attention to, other networks.
Right. Interesting. And so you meet Roger Ailes the first time. Any story there? Because there usually is.
Well, he was sort of funny. I mean, I didn't, it's a sort of a chubby little guy, so he was nice to me, and I really was not planning to go to Fox when I met him. I went up to just to sort of see, well, maybe I'll try it, maybe I won't. I didn't know much about it, but he seemed like a nice enough guy. I was there with my husband, and we made a deal on a handshake. But here was the problem I had. I agreed to go for less money. Mm-hmm. So, and I then went back and looked at my CNN contract. They had me under contract until March 31st. Mm-hmm. But I had a window when I was permitted to talk, so I wasn't filing it.
Right.
So I go back and look at my Fox contract and my CNN contract, and it says CNN has a right to match. And I'm thinking, oh no, and so like my husband says, you have to call Ailes and tell him. And I said, I'm not calling him, you call him. You're the one who, I said, you were with me. And so we went back and forth. So I wrote a letter to Dick Parsons, who was CEO at the time. And because in my contract, it said who I had to deal with, but the people I had to deal with had already been booted in the merger. So Dick Parsons, who was then the CEO of Time Warner, was the only one. I wrote a letter to him and I said, it doesn't define match. And one of the things that match is the environment. And I was having a tough time in the CNN environment because all my friends were getting, I walked down the hall at night and there'd be another sign off the door of somebody who had gotten, let go or laid off. And, it was just a miserable environment for me because my friends were gone and I felt like, I'm the last one, and Dick Parsons.
So you went to Dick Parsons, you told him that, hey, match could mean a lot of things and would.
We hadn't defined it. It was not defined as money. I think everybody thought of it as money, but, he let me go and he was gracious about it.
Well, I remember Roger used to love meeting with talent at the opposing stations, even if he was, and if he wasn't interested in hiring him, hiring that person, he would meet with him in a public place. So like he'd have, he and Larry King would have lunch at Patsy's because Roger would be like, you know what? It's going to make him scared over there. They're going to give him more money for his contract renegotiation. My lunch with him just cost CNN $1 million. I mean, he would sometimes intentionally do that, which I.
Well, I once had lunch early on with him and my husband at Patsy's. It's funny you should mention Patsy's.
That was his place. But no, he again, from his point of view, it was a no-lose situation. We just talked, we had dinner, but if it made the other people skittish.
Ken, I wasn't married to TV. You have to understand that I was the accidental anchor. When I went to CNN, I had a great law practice. I was an adjunct professor at Georgetown. I enjoyed what I was doing. So when I went to talk to Roger in December of 2001, I'd made the decision to leave CNN just because my friends were gone.
Right.
And so I wasn't intending to necessarily sign a contract, but he seemed like a nice enough guy and maybe I'd give it a try. And so, it was sort of whimsical that I did.
But doesn't TV get, once you get on, you didn't, that wasn't your goal in your career to get there. But once it's there, they're throwing more money at you than almost any other profession can. You've got fame.
Successful. I won some pretty big judgments as a trial lawyer.
Fair enough. But TV is a well paid entity.
Yeah, but I'm not the glamorous type kid.
But then you've also got fame and power. There's just a lot of things that come in. You say that, but here you are. You're still on TV. Now you're on 2 networks as opposed to 1. I'm a little bit shy. So that was actually the downside to me because I'm not the glamorous type. Right. I wasn't sitting in the makeup chair for hours. You don't see me going to big parties. You don't see me out and I don't make the scene in New York. You don't see me on page 6 in the New York Post. So that wasn't what drove me. What I liked about TV was you got a ringside seat. That's what I liked. Although I didn't like covering trials because I didn't get to go inside the bar and be on the inside. So, I didn't like being sort of a spectator. So that was a drawback. But the other thing, too, is it was so much easier. Now, as a trial lawyer, I did murder cases. I handled death penalty cases. And the pressure was enormous, especially on the young person, because I was reasonably young 25 years ago. And the one thing I noticed about TV is that TV was easy. There was no pressure, zero pressure. If I did something bad, I humiliated myself. I didn't cost someone his life, It's funny. I asked Roger the same thing. I said, Roger, because and I worked with him in the political world before, and I said, which is harder? And he said, look, here it's money. We mess up, we lose some money. When I was running a guy's Senate campaign, if I messed up, I destroyed his entire career. And he actually thought that was a higher pressure environment.
Yeah, or if you do landlord-tenant law in the inner city, which I did for a while, someone could be put out on the street if you messed up. And as a young person, it's like, that was tough. TV is, I can't believe that they pay us as much money to do such an easy job, actually.
It's easy for some people, but it's really, really a rare talent to be able to do it. I've seen, because I go out with a crew and there's the reporter making 4 times as much as the camera person and the producer. I'm like, but go stand in front of that television, talk for 2 minutes. Don't say, look good, know all the facts, don't screw up, never say the F word. And it's hard. I've seen people.
You may say so, but I got to tell you, you be an emergency room technician or emergency room nurse or a firefighter. I mean, look, it is a cushy job, and it gives you, you get a wonderful view of what goes on in the world, and you get the inside scoop lots. And it is, I think, is enormously easier than most jobs, and it's fun.
Where do you see TV going now and news going now with the whole
it's going
environment that we have?
Well, TV, as we know, it's sort of the linear, what they call linear, which is on your television screen. That's going. I mean, it's being replaced by Roku, which is streaming, or on your iPhone. So, it's all going to go to streaming. The whole fake news thing, in many ways, in our by making a lot of mistakes, we've made ourselves vulnerable. If we didn't make mistakes, one of the worst things that's happened in the news business happened on Inauguration Day. First, the president. He made a huge mistake. He picked that stupid fight over his crowd size. I mean, really, how big your crowd is. I mean, that was one of the, to me, it's like I thought, it's not presidential to be worried about your crowd size on your first day.
Right.
But something else horrible happened that day, equally as bad, probably worse, is that the White House press pool that follows the president, obviously we pool all our resources, and there'll be, someone from print, someone from TV, and the cameraman who will follow the president around. And when the president went into the Oval Office, the first press pool report that came out of the Oval Office, this is President Trump's first time in the Oval Office, is that the Martin Luther King bust had been removed from the Oval Office.
Right.
Obviously, that was associated with President Obama,
right.
and it was supposed to paint a picture of President Trump. Well, it turned out that was wrong, that it had been moved or something within the Oval Office. It was corrected about 10 minutes later. But when you make mistakes like that,
right.
I mean, they're just so, it makes us all vulnerable, and I'm not saying we're all going to be right. I'm going to get it wrong a lot of times, and I probably have gotten it wrong, but it's the mistakes that make us vulnerable to the criticism.
But the mistakes these days seem to be, when mistakes are made, they seem to be 90%, 95% on one side of the ideological spectrum as opposed to the other. In other words, if you looked at a Russian investigation, you would assume that half of the mistakes that they made would have made the president look guilty of collusion. Half the mistakes would have made him look less guilty or not guilty of collusion. That kind of never happened.
Well, I let that be in the eye of the beholder. I'll stay out of that fight, and I'll look at my own work, and I'll try to do my best to be fact-oriented and to get it right. At the bottom, it's like, I'll tell you one thing. It's like, you can say things to me. You can say I'm stupid, I'm ugly, I'm whatever you can say. But if you say I'm unfair, that gets to me, because more than anything else, I want to be fair. I want to be fair to the facts. So I don't care what anyone says about me, but if you say I'm unfair, that bothers me, because I don't want to be unfair.
But have you seen our profession, and I don't know if it's our current or former or whatever that is. I remember saying in the midst of the Mitt Romney campaign, wow, I've never seen the press this biased before in my lifetime. And I'd worked in politics and media my whole life. And then it got 1,500% worse in the last couple years.
Well, part of it is money, because think about this. When Mitt Romney selected Paul Ryan for his running mate, vice president, something happened that was a huge signal to all of us. Is if you watch TV, if you watch the cable universe, you'll see that so many anchors, correspondents, and pundits said the same. They said that the choice of Paul Ryan was bold. They all used the same word. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, what are the odds that they're all using the same word unless they're just listening to each other? And that was the problem. They were all inside the beltway or inside the story, listening to each other to the point where they were using the same descriptive word. And if you look at the money aspect of it, and you know this as well as I do, I'm grateful to, when I was at Fox, I went to North Korea 3 times. I traveled the world. That cost a fortune. I went, did all these things. But if you look at the news business, is that it's very cheap to keep people inside the studio talking than it is to send them out to enterprise news stories. That's very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. And each quarter, the heads of these media companies are reporting to the shareholders their quarterly earnings. If you've spent a fortune out enterprising stories, your quarterly earnings are going to be low. If you keep people in the studio and say snarky, insulting things about the politicians, about each other, it's not going to cost much. And chances are it's going to spike the ratings because people will oftentimes listen to that.
I actually think it's the second half of that equation that counted more than the first half. I mean, you're right, it is expensive to travel people, but in comparison to like all the other numbers, it's a relatively small expense. Just a small 3-person office, satellite office with literally 1 reporter, 1 producer, 1 camera. You're looking over $1 million a year probably $1.5 million a year before you jump on a plane or do anything else like that. But when they came and you could have somebody just sitting in a chair talking, and the ratings would be 30% higher.
But it doesn't cost anything. You can get all the guests you want on TV and never spend a dime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and so so I understand it's sort of a here's my thought on it. Here's Greta sort of talking. I think let me be a moralist for a while. I think because the press is the only occupation that's expressly cited in the Constitution for protection, freedom of the press, that we have an obligation that maybe not making every dollar, maybe we can only make 99 cents and not make a dollar. We could pull back a little bit instead of trying to make as much money as we think we can. And I'm talking about these news organizations, so that we can do better quality work. And I think that there's such a chase in these corporations for money that I think that we have lost sight of what our mission is for the American people.
I think now, is press cited in the Constitution or speech?
Freedom of press, freedom of both. Freedom of press, freedom of speech.
Is the word press?
Freedom of assembly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I didn't know whether it was specifying freedom of speech or freedom of press, and I got to reread my Constitution. I remember one time. The way that worked was the beginning of the quarter. Roger would have to get 2% more growth that quarter, whatever that was. And I remember one time he was pounding his fist saying, we're behind on budget. We have to tighten this up. And Britt Hume said, well, Roger, aren't we making, $1 billion a year, which we were. And Roger exploded because that's not the way they see it. And it wasn't the way they see it because they wanted more and more every single time.
That's my point. Right. So it's a lot cheaper to keep people. A lot of people keep people in the studio to just talk back and forth, than it is to send them out to enterprise stories. Let me give you another example.
Sure.
When I was at Fox, I was sent up to Alaska. This was after, remember when Senator Murkowski was beaten in the primary, a Republican primary for Senate. And it was a big shock that she was beaten. So she ran as a write-in candidate. And nobody had ever won as a write-in candidate. Right. Fox sent me up to New York to cover a debate, which included the Democratic candidate, Murkowski is the write-in, and I think the Republican nominee, I think his name was, I can't remember, Miller or something. Right. And I went up there, and no write-in candidate ever won this. I mean, it's just absurd to think of write-in. Well, I got to Alaska, and I looked all over Alaska. There were Murkowski signs. There was an ad that was run by a political ad. Senator Ted Stevens, who was loved in Alaska and been killed in a plane accident. Right before the plane accident, he'd cut an ad for Murkowski. So he was endorsing her from the grave. And it was Murkowski. Well, I went back to Washington and I said that Murkowski was going to get elected. Everyone looked at me like I had three heads because it was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, Murkowski is a write-in. Are you kidding? Well, sure enough, she did win. And I was right. Not because I'm some great visionary, but because I got out of the studio, went up to Alaska and saw the obvious. And that's what I'm talking about. That's where the quality has declined. So if we send people out more often, if the reporters got out of the studio, and I don't blame the reporters for this, but I blame management and corporations trying to get the extra dollar, but we'd have better quality because I know reporters want to do better quality.
Do you think the average reporter, political reporter, either online, on cable, or wherever these days on the national level, do you think that they're trying to be fair?
I don't think I think they are fair. And I think you go back to my description about how everyone said bold. You stay in this bubble and you so often talk to each other that you only hear one thing. Right. And I don't think anyone's deliberately being unfair. I think you get caught in that echo chamber, you get caught in that bubble. And I think that's the problem. And that goes back again, like get out of the studio.
A lot of that's two cities. It's DC and New York. We saw over the weekend, 20,000 people lost their power in Manhattan, and it was wall-to-wall coverage across the world. And 20,000 people in Wisconsin lose power, and you wouldn't even find an AP right through on it.
Right, that's true.
Used to kind of drive me crazy as the West Coast person. It was like the Yankees would win something, and we're hearing a week about the Yankees. The Angels would win something, and it was like, yeah, whatever.
The who?
Angels, Yankees, I don't know. I'm not a sports person.
No, I was just teasing you like I don't know. No, of course.
I literally don't know any of that stuff. I barely know that. I know the Green Bay Packers, though.
I do too. I'm a shareholder.
Was that expensive? Or was it one of these things where you do $200? Now, are they owned?
It's $200, and it's immoral not to own one if you have the opportunity to buy one.
Now, and is that something that then people? I mean, do people own big chunks of it, or was it just a fun little thing like that?
I think you're only allowed to own one share. I mean, every time they've had different sales of it over the years,
right?
And whenever they need money, they'll say, we need $15 million. $15 million.
Nobody puts in $500,000 and buys a big chunk.
There's some limit, but it sells like hotcakes. I mean, everybody wants it. It's like you want it.
That's funny. Yeah, there's not a whole lot.
And you get nothing for it. You don't get a seat. You don't get to stand in line first at the concession stand. You get absolutely zero, except you get bragging rights. That's worth it.
That's worth it. All right, The Loudest Voice. Have you seen some of this Showtime series? They have now aired 3 of them. What are some of your top line thoughts on that?
It's, first of all, I'm struck by how much the acting actually pretty much captures the people. I'm not saying that the content is necessarily correct, but it's the character the actor who plays Roger Ailes looks like Roger Ailes.
Right.
The one who plays Laurie Loon looks like Laurie Loon. I don't think the guy who plays Bill Shine necessarily looks like him, but the acting actually pretty much captures. So far it's all about New York, and I was in DC, so I really don't know any of this stuff, and I look at this and I go, first of all, before this even started, is that one day in July of 2016, when Fox blew up, it's like, what? It was so, it was such a shock to so many people. I think especially in DC, because we're so removed, we're 200 miles away from the mother house. So I assume they're taking dramatic license with the people. I am trying to figure out what's accurate, what's exaggerated as I watch it. There's some things that, catch my attention, like, because I'm trying to test it, because I'm curious myself about what was going on in the place, because it's still so shocking to me that one day everything was fine at the place, next day it all.
And the next day it was Animal House.
Yeah. But there was the night of 9/11. Roger Ailes was said to have brought Rupert Murdoch back to his house, and they're sitting there. They light a fire in the fireplace. I love fires, and I'm always cold, but I don't think I've ever, maybe it was cold September 11th in New York, but I thought you're not going to light a fire on September 11th. So that's the only thing I sort of pick out, and I think, like, that can't be. And I assume the rest of it, my guess is I'll give 50% accurate, 50% exaggeration, and I'm guessing at that.
Right. So my kind of take on Russell Crowe as Roger Ailes, he looked exactly like him. Didn't really sound like him. Every once in a while, it's like, hey, there's Russell Crowe talking through a Roger Ailes fat suit. What I felt is that his character didn't capture kind of the energy and attitude of Roger. I mean, Roger had sparkling eyes. He was always funny. He was always kind of an upbeat person. I mean, obviously he sometimes screamed and sometimes did that, but he was so overwhelming. But this character of him seems to go from morose to angry to conniving, and really missed the Roger that I knew for 30 years.
Well, you knew Roger better than I did. I would have lunch with him once a year, and I would deal with him on the phone a handful of times during the year, because I really didn't have much to do with him. But the thing that struck me about Roger is, now that I look back, I think, okay, that was odd. But I remember in the beginning, he was, as you say, because that's what was so engaging, why I signed on with Fox. He made Fox sound fun. Why would I go for less money? And why would I start something new? I was happy to go back to Parks Law. I could have stayed at CNN. So there was something captivating about him. But as years went on, and this is the thing that's portrayed in the show, is the paranoia. And it was sort of odd, is that every year when I go up to see Roger, I actually would see him a couple more times in between there, but just to stop in and say hi, not to spend any time, is there would be another lock on his door, or there'd be another door, or but and he had all these different excuses for all these locks. And my husband and I would sort of like, shrug it off, like, Roger's got another door. But, but at the time he was saying that, that he had threats on him because of the positions of Fox News. And I've had death threats on me. So it was perfectly, at the time, I just didn't dwell on it. Now that I look back, I think, yep, that was pretty weird.
Let's talk the larger philosophy of, so you can't write a story about Roger Ailes without making paragraphs 2 through 4 talking about his allegations, some of which were likely true, some of which I know were not true. And every story gets into that. And I guess I have a question of, but then sometimes, and I wonder whether I'm being a Roger apologist, because I in many ways.
I don't think you can't ignore it.
Well, so the question is, how much do you put? I mean, when you are writing the story of, I don't know, let's say Kennedy, who was passing girls around to cabinet members, or when you write the story of Martin Luther King, who there are now some horrific stories coming out, and there were earlier before. What percentage of if you were doing the write-up on Martin Luther King in America, what percentage of it should you be talking about the orgies and the alleged rape and those types of things versus, oh my gosh, this guy freed did amazing things in America?
I think that's a personal judgment on everyone's part, but you can't ignore the stuff with Roger, only because some of it has been demonstrated to me to have been true.
Sure.
Since I left. I mean, look, had I known of any that, then I would have been out the door. I was out the door at Fox at CNN when my friends left. I wouldn't stick around Fox if there was bad behavior. But I don't think you can deny it. The facts are what the facts are.
No, I got that part. The question is when you were doing a retrospective of some person's life, how much is it proper to look at? What is the proper amount of time and energy and discussion to put on that versus the other? In whatever person you're talking about,
it's a personal judgment, and it's like, how do you be fair? You just do the. I know.
Right. All right.
I just don't. I mean, look, I got a problem. I mean, like I know over at over at CNN, they've got Brian Stelter who does talking about media, critiquing media, and Howard Kurtz critiquing media at Fox, where they're both paid by news organizations. I mean, so there's a lot of it's like. You struggle to be as fair as you can, but it's a personal thing.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how you do that. The smartest thing would be for them not to. I mean, for Howard to not be talking about Fox and for Brian not to be talking about and let him rock.
Wait a second. No. Howard shouldn't be talking about CNN because it's a direct competitor, and Stelter shouldn't be talking about Fox because it's a direct competitor. It looks like they're carrying water.
I see more of Brian's stuff around just because he's more active kind of in the Twitter sphere and whatnot. And I kind of have the impression that he and a couple of the media people there almost feel like they're part of the PR organization at CNN.
But before I even get to that, is that you shouldn't be talking about your own organization or a direct competitor.
Right.
It's like, or I mean, you got to explain it. It's not enough to say that this is a competitor. I mean, it helps because full disclosure, but it's not an.
But now it seems like a food fight. I mean, these guys, they spend half the time pointing fingers and sticking it in the eye of their competitors and defending them.
But that's because cable news has become a team sport, and it spikes the ratings. When you poke the other team. What I don't like is if you look at. I mean, you take a media website, and you take a cable show, and they spend a lot of time talking about each other. This is very valuable airtime. Why in the world would you want to turn on one cable news to hear about what's going on another cable news?
Do you watch any YouTube or exclusively online news content? Are you changing your personal behavior as much in there?
I watch a lot of local news, primarily because of Gray TV, and I'm now really hooked into the local news thing. And the Pew Research talks about and had talked about how local news is considered more reliable by viewers. And I wanted to see what everybody was talking about. So naturally, I do that. I watch VOA because I do volunteer work there, and they reach all around the world. And I watch BBC. I like the Associated Press. And then, of course, I also watch, periodically I'll watch the cable news. Periodically, I'll watch the broadcast news. And read. I read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. So I consume all of it. Right. But the first part is my.
Why do you like local news? I find local news to be one of the most brain dead entities out there, that you could almost get the local news that they did a year ago today, and somebody died in a car crash. And another thing.
No.
I find it to be the same drama played over and over again with a laugh track.
Okay, here's a perfect example. And this, let me tell you about. Of course, this is a Gray station, and I've got a new show, a Sunday show syndicated on Gray. Let me do full disclosure. But during the hurricane but almost hurricane in New Orleans last weekend, I went on the internet and looked at the Fox 8, I think it's called Fox 8, which is a gray station. It's just a Fox affiliate, coincidentally, in New Orleans. And they had on 2 anchors, and the 2 anchors were born and raised in New Orleans. And when you hear them talk about what's going on there in the different communities, where the weather's hitting, what the impact is, they know so much more than we in the national media when we sort of parachute in and say, look, there's water. Right. I think if you live in the community, you have a greater depth of information experience because just coming in for 3 hours or 3 days. So it was absolutely, I was looking at it and I was thinking, they're doing an incredible job. They know so much. And if you put 2 national anchors doing it, couldn't compare because they don't live there. They just don't have the institutional knowledge.
Yeah, I guess I'm just reacting more to the content than when I turn on the local news. It's like, wow, a building burned again. And it just seems to, and maybe I'm less involved with my local community, but
maybe you're not involved. Maybe, you know what? If you're going from the sort of the national news to the local, and you've been stuck in the national, you may not give it the break. But you talk about, like, let's take the tariffs, President Trump's tariff. Right. Well, okay, we have a lot of discussion about it here, but if you watch the local in Iowa, and like I said, I watch the local news in Iowa, you hear how it really affects the farmers, and you hear farmers interviewed, and they tell you how it affects it. That's much more informative to me than to hear someone in the national media talking about it. I think the depth of information, you really learn the impact of different policies, whether it's student loans or infrastructure or anything, is that the national media sort of, with all due respect, sort of parachutes in for a day or two and then leaves. And no offense to them, but we don't live and breathe it in the community, so we don't understand the community.
Right. That's fair. All right. So you on Twitter, you have always, ever since I've known Twitter existed, you've been like, and you've been great at it. Why?
I don't know if I'm great at it.
Well, but yeah, I mean, you look at the number of followers you have, you're always there. I mean, look, I look at a Twitter thing and I'll tweet something out and then I'm like, should I have said that? And of course, if you want to, it seems like if you just say kind of commonsensical things, and I'm not trying to indict anybody here, that it's like, that's easy to get ignored. You say something kind of stupid and everybody pays attention. You've turned it into a conversation with a group of people, though, and that's,
I like that. See, the one thing that we started this conversation about TV. What I don't like about TV is that you're talking at somebody and you don't even know who these people are. I mean, I don't know if it's 3 people watching 3 million or 30 million, and you're talking at them. I actually like people. I like to interact with them. I want to know what they think. And when I tweet, someone tweets something back, I sort of know what the person thinks, so then I can tweet back. And the people who rip my skin off, and I do get that. Some people excoriate me.
You're funny when you scold them, though.
Yeah, but I figure, like, what, they must be unhappy for some reason. They don't even know me and they hate me. I mean, it's like, I'm not that bad. I mean,
no, but most people either flame back, but you kind of like, you do that finger wag. You're like, that really wasn't nice and that wasn't fair. You should contribute to my dog fund or whatever.
I had a Twitter swear jar for a while, and when people were really awful, I'd make them tell them to go in some charity that I had. But look, people who are people who are nasty on Twitter, I bet 9 times out of 10 something's not going right in their lives right now. It just isn't, whether it's a momentary thing or a lifelong thing.
Is it the equivalent of people being in their cars, though, and somebody cuts them off and they're, you motherfucker, son, and it's like, dude, did somebody just cut you off in their car?
I don't even know what, I mean, my husband's a horn honker. I'm not. I don't even know where the horn is on my car. I don't honk the horn. It's like, someone cuts him off and he thinks, it's like he gets mad. I don't care.
I used to be that way when I was younger, and then it was just like, okay, this is just silly. And it was weird because my dad he was a hot-blooded Italian, honking, and then all of a sudden he might be jumping out of a car and yelling at somebody. And so I'd never honk my horn. But when I went to New York, everybody was honking their horns, and it was like, it was a psychological weird thing. I was getting triggered by horns, thinking, oh shit, now somebody's dad is going to come out screaming at my cab or whatever. And that's just a New York thing, I think, where they love honking.
Well, my father was very low key, so maybe that's where I get it. But it's like, I take a deep breath, and I mean, look, once in a while I'll take the bait, Twitter, but for the most part, and I sort of have fun, like when someone insults me, someone said something about something, had some poor grammar and it said something insulting. I didn't know something. And I said, well, I guess I know grammar. Some only know grammar, something like that. Sometimes I'll be a little snarky back, but for the most part, it's like Twitter could be a lot nicer place than it is.
Right.
But we could all help sort of turn the temperature down a little bit by not taking the bait all the time.
That's true. Now, one of the things that's always impressed me about you is you always have a cause in your life that you are kind of that's bigger than you, and that you just see. You do a lot of stuff overseas and whatnot. Do you have anything going on right now that people should contribute to or look at? Or there's a lot of problems in the world.
I always have the thing that's really gripping me now is the Rohingya, who are an ethnic group that have been, the Holocaust Museum, the UN, and Congress has described it as genocide, and the world is just looking the other way. There are 1 million people who got pushed out of Myanmar simply because they're Rohingya, and they're absolutely stateless, and they've been pushed into Bangladesh. In fact, I did a documentary with Voice of America. I'm very proud to say it got a New York Film Festival award, 3 of them for it. And you can see it on YouTube, so if I can get people to watch it because you'll understand it. But it's called Displaced, and it's a Voice of America documentary. And and the thing is, 1 million people got pushed out. Some were just horrible things. They watched as their family members were chopped up with machetes. They took babies out of mothers' arms and threw them in fires. This is the Myanmar military. It's just incredible. But the ones who survived and made it into Bangladesh, they immediately started cutting down all the brush to build huts so that they could live, and they used it for fuel. Well, then now along came the monsoon, and there's nothing to hold the soil, and it's all on hilly, so now they have mudslides, and they're all sliding into each other, and the mud is going on. And actually, when I did the documentary with VOA, we did it right as monsoon season was starting, and I looked like a drowned rat. But I knew at all times, as miserable as it was, and you can see it, I knew I'd always be going home. I knew I'd always have food. I knew that I would always have an education if I want. Of course, I knew this is just incredible, and the world has looked the other way, and it's breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking.
We've done that. We've done that multiple times in our lifetimes, though, where there's been a literal, almost the equivalent of a Holocaust or a minor Holocaust that barely made.
Rwanda, that was genocide. Yeah,
sure.
That was the most recent. But I've been in the Sudan where Bashir, I was up in the Nuba Mountains where Bashir was dropping bombs on cars, and in fact, it was so bad that we were traveling in a white vehicle that we caked with mud so that his bombers overhead wouldn't see our cars. They'd blend in with the sand so he wouldn't drop a bomb on us. So it's like ugly. There's a lot of ugly things going on in the world. But Ken, see, that's just it. Is that that's what the news media should be doing, going out and bringing these stories back, not because the U.S. can police the world. We can't pay for anything, but if we had more information, I think, we might have a thought on what we could do that might maybe to help, but instead to sit in the studio, 24/7 and just have snarky comments going back and forth, that's just not the mission of the media. It shouldn't be.
International was always a hard sell, just because we knew that the numbers would plummet every time, and especially when people don't look like you and when they talk a different language, and it's like kind of the more removed they are from what the audience looks like and sounds like and the culture, it seems like it's the harder to get people's attention on that.
And here's the other thing is that when I would do it on my show, and I used to argue with Roger Ailes because it was expensive, and and as you say, the ratings just weren't there. But we knew from the minute-to-minute ratings is if I dropped segments in on human trafficking in Cambodia, for instance, in my show, because I went to Cambodia. I was lucky. Roger sent me all over the world because he wanted me out of there.
God, he bitched all the time when he sent you all those places.
I know, he always bitched. I know, I was always fighting with. He was always fighting with me about it, and I was fighting with him. We both get mad at each other. But when you looked at the minute-by-minute range, the minute I got off something that was domestic, and went to like human trafficking in Cambodia, is the ratings would drop. And that's the whole thing, is that news organizations, they're public corporations, they need to make money. But the viewers say they want more of that, which is not really true if the ratings are dropping. And number two is that, yes, news organizations are there to make money. This is not some socialist organization. But, when News Corp was making $1.2 billion a year in profit, did it really need to couldn't it spend a little bit more money to send people out to do these things?
No, because they had to buy the Cartoon Network next month.
Yeah, or Rupert had to buy MySpace.
But that's what Roger was always. That's why Roger was always so mad at some of the kids. He's like, yeah, I make the money and they spend it. It just got into his craw, because it was true. We'd make tons of money and they would go out. They made their money back on MySpace, actually. But
they did not. They sold it for $26 million.
No, but they got close to $500 million back in the first year or two that they owned it, and then they destroyed it.
I don't believe that. And the thing is, Rupert Murdoch and I are not good friends at all. But I will say this: is that Rupert was always sort of cutting edge on tech, but he was always there a little bit too early. He was there too early on MySpace. He had this digital TV, this digital magazine thing too. Right. Rupert and I are not, we're not chummy at all. I can, my only conversation with him was an unpleasant one.
No, he fired me. So
he didn't fire me. I quit. I walked on him. But anyway, but he was always. I give him credit because he was always looking ahead in tech, and I always liked that about him.
He kind of looked at the world from 100,000 feet. I mean, he would look at it internationally. He would look at, we at Fox would be us versus CNN and MSNBC, whereas he would have a much, much higher kind of.
He is not somebody who inspires me or I admire.
Right. I like the things he's produced. Look, Fox News wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for Rupert. And I'm a big believer that Fox gave a third voice to what are two very similar voices and one dissimilar voice onto the national scene, and I think that was a good thing. Now, our problem now isn't that we have one voice like that. Our problem now is that we have 400 and none of them like each other. But
I think we've gotten off the mission. I mean, what is the news business? It's to go out and get facts for the viewers. That's what it is, or to the readers.
Yeah, no, I'm convinced that most of the national has devolved into political players at this point, and they do it under their own belief that they're being fair, but I think that they abandoned that pretense, especially maybe 6 months before the election. I think that those on the left said we have to stop Trump Hitler from taking over America, and the Foxes and some of the others said we have to absolutely defend this person, and we're in that.
I think it'd be a lot smarter if everyone quit watching what everybody else was doing and used his own sort of good conscience and went out and looked for facts, and not get poisoned by what others may say, because it's so easy when you're in that echo chamber, right. To naturally. It's like everybody in San Francisco likes the 49ers. It's sort of like it's contagious, and so you're same in a news organization. If you're sitting in a room where everyone says the same thing, for months and months and months on end, it gets contagious. You start thinking that way.
Do you think part of the food fight in America is because we're doing pretty well as a country? We don't have a serious existential threat like when you and I were growing up. We had the Soviet Union, and we were taking nuclear tests under we were jumping under desks in schools. What do you think that's part of what's going on?
I think that's a large part, because we during those times, as you point out, we had a common enemy. And we had that same kind of common enemy at 9/11. And so for a short period after 9/11, you saw an enormous amount of working together, working across the aisle. We don't see any of that anymore.
Right.
But I'm not looking for an enemy. I mean, I don't want something.
Well, that's the problem. It's like then Ebola is the only thing, or some existential threat, which we kind of haven't had since September 11th in a real, in an obvious way. I mean, some people would point to global warming, some people would point to different things, but there's not been a clear, this might hurt my family thing coming out. So what's your studio going to be like?
Blue.
Okay. Well, good.
Blue. It's pretty. It's got a jib camera. Let's see what else.
And will that be your studio that you use for both or one? Will you do VOA stuff out of there, or how will that work?
No. VOA stuff I do out of VOA. VOA I do as a volunteer,
Right. No, I did.
I know. It's like I'm as a volunteer. It's like I've been doing it now for a year and a half, and it's
do you like
fascinating. Yeah, because you walk in and they're journalists from all over the world, and who have, first of all, I'm the only one in the whole building that can only speak one language. Right. So it's fascinating. Or they speak Urdu or French or Spanish, right. Or Thai or Mandarin. So the journalists are fascinating, and most of them come with experiences. Like a lot of them have fled the Soviet bloc or something. Right. One woman who's there. Her husband was executed by the KGB, and so she fled with her 2 children, and she's a journalist there. So they're fascinating people there. So I feel like my life experience is so small.
Sounds like it's college all over again. I mean, that's kind of what that was my experience at college. I went from a very homogeneous growing up to like, wow, look at these people and foreigners and things like that I'd never bumped into before in life.
Yeah, I got to college and I thought, whoa, where did everybody learn to recite the alphabet already? They were way ahead of me. When I got to college, I thought, oh, I have so much to catch up.
If you like this at all, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the little bell icon, and it'll let you know when the next one of these videos comes up. We're also involved in the comment section, so please ask questions or give your thoughts. We'd be happy to chat with you. Finally, LaCorte News is going to be putting out a lot more videos. We're taking a very critical look at the media because they often lie. And we would love to have you on board with this and giving us your thoughts as we grow this into something real. Thanks.